Welcome back, friends. This is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com coming to you on the 20th of January 2015 here across the dateline in Japan. But once again, we are joined on the line by our old friend and, of course, the founder and editor of BoilingFrogsPost.com, none other than Sibel Edmonds herself. Sibel, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Hi, James. Great to be back.
Excellent. Well, obviously, I think something that a lot of people have been writing you about is your opinions on what's going on right now with the latest developments in the so-called war on terror and all of the brouhaha that's happened recently in Paris. But and there are many different pieces of this story to get to. But before we get to that, I actually want to take a look at a story that you brought to my attention recently that I think is exceptionally important in terms of this Gladio B narrative, which you've been laying out for a number of years now. And this one comes via the New York Times, January 14th, 2015. Turks are held in plot to help Uyghurs leave China. And this is talking about 10 Turkish citizens and 2 Chinese citizens that have been arrested and accused of providing altered Turkish passports to terrorist suspects from the western region of Xinjiang, a state-run newspaper reported on Wednesday. Xinjiang, that sounds familiar to people who may have caught some of our coverage, previous coverage on the Gladio B program in general. But Sibel, your take on what's happening here and how this ties into the greater narrative of Gladio B.
Sure. As you just said, we have covered this during our Gladio interview series with your program. And people who have been following my interviews, if they recall, even in 2004, 2005, during my interviews, whether with Peter B. Collins or a bunch of other outlets, I always talked about the importance of Xinjiang and what Turkey and U.S. like to refer to as East Turkestan, the Xinjiang region, and the importance of it as one of the main center stage operations for Gladio B. And of course, also the connection of these operations with the people, again, that you have covered, we have covered together on Gladio series, the Susurluk actors, and the one of the top operatives for Gladio B for NATO, who was stationed in Chicago while he was one of the most wanted Europol, Interpol fugitive for terrorism and narcotics. Well, he took between 1993 and 1997, he took at least 4 trips from Chicago with diplomatic passports from the Turkish consulate there as Gladio operatives to Beijing, and from there into the region of Xinjiang in this plot, in this operation to organize the dissent, the ethnic minority there, Uyghurs, against the mainland China and the Chinese government, etc. So I used to talk about this a lot, and people would say, why? I mean, she's talking about Xinjiang, Turkestan. Let's talk about Saudi Arabia, man. Why can't we talk about Pakistan? They are relevant. Who cares what's happening in the place called Xinjiang? We don't even know how it's spelled. Well, as you see, it's been happening. It's extremely important. And again, it pops up. Unfortunately, 99% of people, even though New York Times, with its own tilt, covered it, they would read it and with the names not making sense, saying, okay, maybe it's some immigration issues where you have illegal immigrants being smuggled out of this country. But it's not. It's never been the case. A lot of these people are taken out by the operatives, Gladio operatives, in this case, most of the times by the Turks, because Uyghurs are Turkic minorities. Their heritage, their race, their language, etc. And they are taken out, they are trained, and they are armed, and then they are sent back. And there are various areas, porous borders. I mean, even if you look at Afghanistan, especially now that we have Afghanistan as a kind of a base, you can see how easy it is to smuggle these people out. I mean, to get them out, train them, militaristically train them, and arm them, tell them what to do in terms of the next stage of operations, then send them back from the other side, going through Central Asian Caucasus to Afghanistan, and then back to Xinjiang, where lo and behold, some terror events takes place, and people have no idea how did they get the guns. How were they trained militaristically? Because Xinjiang is under China's control. Well, they are trained outside, similar to with the Syrian opposition, and now there are so many different factions. Their trainings, everything took place outside Syria, outside Iraq, within the NATO domain, in this case in Turkey and in puppet countries like Jordan. So that is the goal, and that is the operation. So the Chinese government's version of the story is much closer than when the New York Times takes the version of the Turkish side saying, oh, yeah, it had to do with some independent operatives trying to make some bucks. One of these guys paid $6,000 to be taken out of Xinjiang. And that's what it's all about. And Chinese government, they're telling a different story. The truth is much closer to the Chinese side than it is to what the Westerners are saying. And again, it's going to be extremely important, this region. You're going to see similar elements that we have been seeing, let's say, with Ukraine, okay? Xinjiang is going to be the next Taiwan, okay? And imagine, when you look at the Pipelineistan, Pepe Escobar's favorite term for the region, and you look at the map, you see the importance of Xinjiang. That is the artery, the entry artery of energy, whether it's coming from Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan into China, whether it's natural gas or if it's oil, it has to pass. They're talking about the Gwadar port, as one possibility of bringing in, the stuff from Iran, and then have Pakistan as beneficiary and China. No way that's going to happen, okay? And as far as the pipeline, as long as the Gladio, United States, the CIA, the NATO, they control that region with the terrorism, can you imagine any pipeline safely going through Xinjiang area and get into the heart of the mainland China? It's not going to happen. So that's why it's very important. That's why we're going to see more. And then it's going to come to the point where we're going to have someone similar to Richard Gere start giving speeches during Oscar acceptance and talk about how these, like they do it with the monks there in Tibet. It would be how these people are being, abused and oppressed, and they need to have their own land, and it needs to be carved out. And as we talked about before, the United States have already brought one of these figures from Xinjiang area into the United States. He lives in McLean, into the State Department, and they had a meeting where they declared him the president of East Turkestan in absentia. So as far as the Gladio U.S. is concerned, they even have a president for Xinjiang. How could you have a president for a country, nation that doesn't exist? There's no sovereignty, it's part of mainland China. Meaning that is the objective. We want another Taiwan. We want to gradually, by playing, how here internally we play the gender card and the race card. Well, for that part of the world to play the minority without land, we're going to help them. They're being oppressed. The Chinese are gunning them down and torturing them. So let's take out this. We put military base there. And we also have the sympathy of the world. Now, I'm not saying Chinese are not abusing their powers with the Uyghurs. I mean, there's a lot of things for Uyghurs that they have the right. I'm not at all challenging that notion. But as the Western nations, United States, Gladio, we've never cared about people suffering. That's not within our interest area unless it can be utilized, capitalized upon to get our objective, meaning have that area, declare it anonymous. We already have a president in place, and make sure that China, energy-wise, is not going to have an easy time to sustain a 6-7 billion population and ginormous economy.
You raise a number of important points there, including, of course, you raise the specter of Richard Gere. This might not be the new Taiwan, it might be the new Tibet, the kind of trendy Hollywood cause célèbre that everyone has to get behind when George Clooney or whoever, CFR member, comes out and speaks out about it. So there's obviously that going on, and then you raise the port of Gwadar as a possible alternative route. Well, even if that did come to fruition, of course, there's the Balochistan, free Balochistan movement that's supported by the usual Congress critters, etc. So again, they have every base covered when it comes to this.
Absolutely.
But I think the other important point that you raised there is, I think there are genuine issues about the way the Han Chinese treat the Uyghur population and the types of anti-terror operations that the Chinese conduct in these regions as a way of trying to counteract this. There really are oppressive things that happen in the name of this, but it's always a question of what then is the solution and how does it play out and for whose interest. And of course, as you say, the president of East Turkestan has already been declared by the US and its allies. So I think we know which way they want that cookie to crumble. And that's I think what we need to be focusing on and the way that this is going to play out. So again, this is just one of those regions that is going to become more important. And I think you're right. In the same way that Ukraine became a flashpoint and a focal point for the new Cold War with Russia, I think something like Xinjiang could become a flashpoint for what's going to happen with China.
Definitely going to come. It's definitely going to come. The question is not whether it's going to come. The question is when. And you see that gradually they are paving the way. So it's going to happen, whether it's 5 years down the road or 2 years down the road. And these things heating up. And of course, Chinese are playing it very, very smart. Very smart. I mean, the modus operandi of China, it's its own thing. You know, Russians have theirs. The Western nations, Brits have theirs. You know, United States has its own. But Chinese, they are just they're incredible. They're incredible. When I keep looking at how they respond things, how they handle it, how they are so logical in terms of business interests, this, how much we want to contain, how much we want to. I mean, have we ever heard China really loudly saying the United States is doing this? They know. They have a very, very good counterintelligence, but look at their business domain and look at the relationship as business. So they are handling it very smartly, and it will be hard for the Western powers to try to throw the bait and say, okay, bite it, okay? So even though they are doing the counter-terror, they are doing it in a very kind of self-controlled, restrained manners because they know what the game is about. They know about the chessboard, and they are not about to bite. And they have been playing it very smart.
Well, 2D chess versus 3D chess, as I've been saying recently. So there's, I think, even deeper levels to this all. But we'll perhaps leave that there. But returning back to this, the latest Paris circus and everything that we've seen playing out from there, one of the headlines that we've seen in recent days that you, again, pointed my attention to from the national.ae that I think is worth noting, if only for its comedic value, anti-terror raids suggest Belgium has become center for extremists. But of course, people who have been following the Gladio B series will know that Belgium has always been the center for extremism. Just generally speaking, it's the NATO branded and approved form of extremism. Anything to add to that analysis?
No, it was so ironic. I just loved it because when I first read, I was like, oh my God, somebody is exposing Operation Gladio. And they basically said it's now is one of the main center of terrorism. Well, as you said, it's the center and it's the capital of NATO where it's headquartered. And Operation Gladio's headquarter is the second European headquarter is in Belgium. And even with my case, as you know, with my work with the FBI and this particular language specialist and her husband, the lieutenant colonel who was part of Operation Gladio, when it became public, my case, both of them were placed on a plane and they were taken to Belgium. And that's where they were stationed for 2 years because they didn't want to be deposed or take the chance of being deposed. But that's where they were sent. They were sent to Belgium. And it is the heart, the center, the beginning of the artery of terrorism in Europe. And for the headline to say that, it was like, finally, Operation Gladio is going mainstream. Of course, when you read the article, you see something totally totally different. But again, I
Yeah.
thought it was, and I think again, people who have been following our conversation, our work, I know they got a kick out of that too.
Well, exactly. Just always substitute NATO for Brussels or Belgium in any headline like that, and I think you might start to get the idea. All right, well, but let's return then specifically to what played out in Paris. Obviously, there has been a lot of speculation going on about what played out there or didn't play out and who was behind it and what really happened. But I think, as always, with these types of events, it's much more interesting and important to take a look at what actually results from it and how the different pieces connect together after we've had time for the dust to settle. And some interesting possibilities in that regard. For example, Press TV just put out an article, Turkey Mafia paid to smuggle Paris suspect into Syria, say sources. Other bits of the puzzle like this, of course, and the official narrative at any rate is pointing back towards Yemen and AQAP. Sibel, your thoughts on what happened in Paris and where this narrative is heading from here?
As you just yourself mentioned, the similarities to, let's say, what happened with the Boston bombing hoax that they put in there, the scripted event, it's incredible how, even the manner of reporting and conflicting report that went on for the first 4 or 5 days. So I think that becomes like a classic within the script of things. We had similar things with the Osama bin Laden being assassinated supposedly in Pakistan. It was the same thing. Put so many pieces of information, a lot of them conflicting, a lot of them contradictory, and maybe possibly baiting some of the more active ones into taking the first few pieces and coming up with their own possible interpretation and narratives, and later have that actually totally false, show that it's false. So then you discredit those people. I did the same thing with the Boston bombing hoax, the scripted Gladio event that took place, the test, and the results of that will come even in the future. We are still not done with this Chechen element, okay? That Dagestan Chechen region is going to come back, and it's going to come back ferociously, because with Ukraine kind of going that way, sideways, you are going to start looking at Georgia again, and there are things that are coming from Georgia. Pay attention, lots of attention to Georgia, and Georgia is going to have the Chechnya and Dagestan elements in it, and that is going to somehow miraculously link back to the people in Boston bombing hoax, and all those things. So that story is not dead yet. But similar thing here with Boston bombing, I kind of kept my mouth shut for 2 weeks, because kind of look, and it's just like, let's take in everything. Let's take in all the contradiction. Let some more facts come out. We had Graham Fuller's connection to the Boston bomber's uncle come out. I mean, he is his son-in-law, and they live together. You're looking at the top CIA Gladio operative. So all those came together and clarified the picture, and it came to a point where it was very, I don't want to use the word safe, but sound to come out and say, this definitely is scripted. Here are the connections that cannot be coincidence. Now, here are the possible implementation of this event to do certain things with more confidence. So the same thing, I know you have been having that, people emailing, tweeting, and saying, why don't you guys cover? Well, millions of people are covering it currently. And there are millions of interpretations out there. And a lot of it seems absolutely smelly. It smells really foul. It seems to have all the elements, but I am not ready to come out with some conclusive saying, here, let's look at these connections, without doing my research, look at it further, and also depend upon other researchers. I was not the one who found the link between Graham Fuller, the CIA Gladio operative Graham Fuller, with the uncle. It was some obscure site that found the documentations, and his residence address, he matched it to Graham Fuller's, and the fact that they lived together, to a point where Graham Fuller had to come out and admit it. He's like, he's a great guy, sure. We used to have this relationship. He lived in my house. So what? Those things started coming. Similar thing, to just take it in, get all the stuff, establish more connections, And the only thing I have put out is from the beginning, what got my interest the most was Yemen element. And I would put my eyes there because we are bogged down now. Intentionally, we want to be bogged down with Syria and Iraq. And before that, we had a lot of, the drone strikes and everything in Yemen. And for a while, we left it alone. And you have to consider this. Just like the United States military-industrial complex, France has a pretty decent-sized military-industrial complex. So what happens is you have the boss nation, okay, the United States with this mammoth of military-industrial complex, and is filling its thing, okay, by taking on all this stuff. United States need to leave some crumbs for its allies, okay? And in this case is France. And with Libya, we saw some of those overlapping interests between the French and, of course, NATO French, but the United States. But with Yemen, I believe it is one of those little prizes that this event may end up justifying and bringing the public support, the French support for France, lo and behold, to get actively involved with Yemen, okay? And much more so than even with Libya. And if we start seeing that, I would say in the next couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, and those debates, conversation going, and together with it, the public support, which I believe is a slam dunk case. I'm not going to put down the French, but based on what I'm seeing, based on what I'm watching, it's been very effective. It's been very effective. Let's get this mother effers, be at them. Let's go, these barbarics, and we can't allow anything like this happen. I think it's a horrific event, and I feel awful, and I do have solidarity for any place losing innocent lives or innocent people. But I wonder what kind of reaction the world would have, the Western world, if we organized that and had similar reactions when Israelis killed 14 innocent children, okay? They were playing soccer on the beach, and they knew that they were playing, and they were kids, and 14 children were massacred, okay? They were bombed. And so the same way, I would like to see people organizing and having solidarity and say, we're going to get together, unite, and not let events like this happen where innocent lives are taken. But we don't see that, unfortunately. I mean, we see it in that part of the world, then we see this thing in this part of the world. And as a result, we have this strategy of tension between the East and the West, and based on religion. This is what Muslims do. Of course, we have had all the prep with the ISIS and all the operations. So very successful, unfortunately. And as I said, once Yemen starts getting more attached to it in more obvious actionable items for France, then I'm going to put that check mark on my list. And then it would be interesting for us to have the discussion, to write a piece of analysis, but to sit down and just throw out too many speculations. I think we have time. It's not going to go away. As you said, the results are going to start coming in. You just gather them, and then it's going to compare them to everything else and see, in so many ways, it's just so predictable. But hey, what is the American English saying? If it ain't broken, don't fix it. Hey, if it works every time, I don't know whether because people are so dumb or because they are geniuses, I don't know which one. Hey, why change it? It works.
Well, maybe it's because people are so predictable. And in that sense, I mean, it's not only the strategy of tension that works because of this pre-programming, it's the clash of civilizations and everything we've been programmed for all this time that gets a lot of the general public to go along with these types of war agendas because, as you say, there are certain pieces of the puzzle they're shown. Be outraged about this 12 people killed in Paris. Do not be outraged about, the hundreds of people killed in drone bombings or or whatever it is, whatever we're not supposed to even think about, let alone be outraged about. So it is just selective focus. But on the flip side of that, I mean, there's also the people who are resisting this agenda, the people who are awake, who call the other people sheep, and that sort of narrative that goes on, who are also as predictable. As you say, I mean, this raises questions about the alternative media and its modus operandi, which is to instantly jump on and scrutinize every detail, every morsel of this story as it's unfolding from the mainstream press that we tend not to believe in a lot of respects anyway, but we're analyzing every bit of data they throw out at us. I mean, that can also be used for people, assuming these types of operations are planned and scripted. Obviously, that can be used against the alternative media as well. Let's throw out this scrap of information. Let's give them this little morsel, and let's get them going down this rabbit trail rather than another. And I think there needs to be more space for reflection on events like these to put it into that larger narrative, because again, we can be easily led along simply by always reacting to what's happening rather than actually trying to step back and observe things from a greater perspective.
Oh, absolutely. This began in late 1990s when we started seeing the birth of alternative media and blog within the blogosphere. At the beginning, it was, I mean, for example, if you start looking and analyzing the amount of money invested by George Soros on alternative media, okay? And again, this started around 1999, 2000. It accelerated during all our whistleblowers activity in 2003, 2014, even with some of the NGOs, POGOs and things. But a lot of money, started being channeled to the deep state money, whether it's George Soros or it's the Rockefeller Foundation or it's the Ford Foundation. They suddenly found their new pet project, and that is, we're going to start feeding the blogs and the so-called alternative media and make sure that that is ours. So they are serving the deep state. And as you said, now people going to the alternative, we may even start seeing some change become circular when mainstream media maybe starts putting out some facts. That is going to be because they are actually putting more emphasis. The deep state, whether it's the Koch brothers or the Rockefellers, it's the Ford Foundation, especially George Soros, look at the hundreds of millions of dollars they are giving to, or Pierre Omidyar, they are giving to alternative. I mean, if you compare that to even during the early 1907, 1908 in New York, and you had the rich feeding and taking over the newspapers, and the influence there. And in terms of the amount and level, if you were to compare it to what started happening in late 1990s with these people investing so much in alternative, actually you're going to see more investment by the deep state on alternative media that they did with the mainstream media, whether it's the New York Times or if it's the Washington Post. So I think it's far more dangerous. And again, it's no-brainer. And you have to look at it and say, well, even though they are dumb and stupid in some cases, they're not that stupid. Then CIA looks and sees, oh, a lot of these critical thinkers are turning into these venues to get their news and information. Who do you think they want to control and put emphasis most? So again, no-brainer. But then if you and I are talking about and give examples and start talking about Amy Goodman, you get those predictable people saying, what? But she's anti-establishment. Well, how come she's making $2 million? And how come the organization is getting $15 million a year from George Soros? Now you tell me, I really want this predictable audience. And sometimes they get in watching the stuff we put out there. I want them to show me the point where the interest of activists, real activists, critical thinkers, the anti-establishment people, intersects with the interest of George Soros. There is no point that they would intersect, right? Then if you can't show me that point, then provide me with an explanation how a scumbag like Soros, okay, the deep state Soros, is giving $20 million to Amy Goodman related and $40 million to blah, blah magazine, whether it's Nation. And Explain it to me. Either you have to say, well, George Soros has other interests that are so noble, humanist, the man cares. I mean, maybe that's why he looks the way he bleeds internally with all the stuff for the freedom. And then he has the other side that is a dirty scumbag businessman. So it's that side that is giving the money. So you either show me the intersection, which you're not going to be able to, or next time just go away, watch something else. When you say, well, why Corbett and Sibel, they're just being tough on Amy Goodman. It's like too predictable. Yawn.
Yes. And this is not just obviously at Amy Goodman, but it is at a lot of different so-called alternatives.
So many. Salon.com. I can just throw all the stuff in there.
Yeah. And then from the philosophical perspective, again, it's not just at the people who are being directly funded by these people, because obviously that's a big red flag, but the people who are falling for the sort of alternative line on some of these things, that can be, again, it can be a sort of bait that's put out there. Hey guys, look at this. Look at this. Don't think about this. Don't think about Xinjiang. Don't think about what's happening in Georgia. Who cares about that? That's boring. This latest thing is the new thing we all have to think about all at the same time. We have to devote all our energies to it. And if you don't talk about it, people will get angry.
Go vote. Go vote. Yeah. Okay? Yeah, we know that Clinton is as a scumbag but there's a degree, because she is by 0.071% less evil than the other guy, whoever is that the other guy. So you go out and vote for her, even though they are both evil. You can challenge puppets, but don't challenge the system. Thou shalt not challenge the system. And that is the central message they all have. Whether they come from the right, Rush Limbaugh, or they're coming from the left, Goodman, or whoever else is out there, they have one central theme in common. One says, do support the right no matter how filthy and corrupt and awful it is, because the left is going to be worse. Does support the system, it's the same system, or the left saying, come and do this, because otherwise the other, the one that is 0.0076% worse may get in there and support the system. As long as you don't deviate from the system, you may pick little small fights with little pawns here and there, but don't abandon the system. Thou shalt vote. Don't forget that part.
It's the pyramid. The left side supports the right side, and it keeps the top at the top and the bottom at the bottom. So again, yes, without fundamental critique of the system itself, we'll never get anywhere. And I know this is a topic you've been thinking about a lot in particular recently, because obviously not only what you're doing at Boiling Frogs Post, but now what you're attempting to do with a new podcast that will be gracing us shortly, I hope. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, right now I'm looking to my right, I'm looking to my left, and this was supposed to be launched last July and August, and then I had operations in my upper jaw. It was horrible. I had 47 stitches, and I'm not going to even get into that. And then, of course, as you know, we have had some problem with the sound, echoes from my side. I started recruiting helps of experts, volunteering. How can I make things better? One came and said, oh, this is not enough. What you have, you need to have a mixer. And blah, blah. And there comes with the dollar amount. So I had to save money and get the mixer. Well, the other problem didn't get fixed. Well, you have the mixer, you have the microphone, you need this thing. And I'm technologically challenged. I am so dumb when it comes to technology. You need to have this thing called compressor. What's that for? Well, it does blah, blah. I still can't explain to you, but you need it. You must have it. How much is a compressor? Fine, I can find a used one. We put that one there. Then we had some other static problems. What in the world is this? Oh, the cable that the unit came with, it's a smaller cable. You need to have a much larger cable for the quality of the sound, the streaming, blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, to make the long story short, we've been putting the equipments together. We got the software. Now comes the hard part, and that is, it's going to happen this week. I'm going to have a podcast for our members, and these are the Boiling Frogs Post activists. And I want to brainstorm with them in what kind of podcast do they want, do we want? Because, frankly, I'm getting bored. I'm getting bored with the straightforward interviews. I love, for example, the debates we were having. That's good, because when you have 3-4 personalities, slightly different or vastly different philosophies come together, you get clarity out of things. I enjoy it. I really like that. So that's the format I like. But as far as a straightforward interview, I'm tired. I mean, I have done the same topics and I have listened to the same topics so often that it almost never nothing comes and sparks something in me. I'm tired. I'm bored. And so many people are doing podcasts, straightforward interviews. So if it bores me, I'm going to bore people, because if I'm not excited about it, I'm sure going to fail in giving something that is thought provoking and gets the juice going and the critical thinking. Then I was thinking of something doing solo. This ends up getting into this element. I call that the guru complex element. It's like, who the F I am to sit here and talk about this topic for the people. Now, I find some people interesting doing that, but I also have lots of problem with people doing that, because sure, there are a bunch of things that I do consider myself someone with the facts, someone with the history and context, but there are so many other things that I am not. For example, when other people are talking about Central America, South America politics, I shut up. I listen, I try to read, because I don't know much. I don't know anything. So my knowledge is so limited with that. Or I'm always listening and trying to learn when people are talking about Federal Reserve, which is a very important issue. But I can't talk about it because I don't even have 10% of the confidence or the research level or the familiarity to open my mouth and start giving opinion on it. So I know my limitation. That leaves, limited particular topics that, okay, I can do a few sessions and talk solo about it, but then that's it. Then what's going to happen? So now I'm thinking about something that is more interactive, and that is starting a discussion thread with our Boiling Frogs Post, members, activists, and take that and say, okay, this episode, I'm going to respond to some of these challenges, and I'm going to respond to some of these questions, and then put it out there. And the coming questions after that will lead to the next podcast. So in general, I have something like that in mind. I don't know if it's going to be successful, but I want it to be interactive. I want it to be what people want. Again, I want to give a quick example. With my books, for example, when I'm invited to go somewhere, they call it book reading. Well, it gets on my nerve. I hate book readings. And I think most people get bored to death when they are sitting on these uncomfortable chairs and you pick a chapter and you read the book. So what I do is I usually have 5 minutes of short, brief intro about why I wrote this book, how I wrote it. Then I like to do Q&A. That gets my juice going. And you see how I'm talking? It's your question. Addressing your question gets me talk. And then you are getting the answer or the response. However, maybe you don't even like the answer, but that's what you're getting. But for me to pick something, I want it to be something that people want to know or they have questions about, rather than me picking a topic and say, today I want to teach you about communism versus the imperialism. Blah. I can't do that. I mean, it's so not me. And I call it the guru complex. That's where we are. So it's going to be experimental to start with. And then I'm going to get the feedback. And the other important thing, and I know this is going to offend some people, but by now, I think most people should know I have no problem with offending people. Some people do. I have even had questions about, yeah, but was it purposefully you tried to make none of the characters really lovable, likable? I'm not into likability. If I were into likability, there were so many things I would do. And actually, I would make good amount of money from that. I'm serious, if I was geared towards going towards likability. Don't offend. Pick side, for example. Pick the Democrats and leave the other one alone. That would make you much more likable person. Because otherwise, you're going to end up being attacked from both sides. That happen to independent people. I don't care. I welcome it. It does not affect my future response or what I'm doing, whether people like me or they don't like me. I really don't care. If people are interested and or they want to know about this particular things or have discussion, join me, that's great, fine. If they don't like me, I don't care. I care if my daughter likes me or not. I care a lot as a mother. But other people's really opinion of me, whether I'm great speaker or I'm horrible speaker or I'm beautiful or I'm butt ugly, I don't care. I really don't care. I have been living this life, I would say, all my life. I live based on my belief system, and whether people like it or not, it doesn't have any consequences for me. Maybe some people are in positions because of wanting to get certain jobs or maintaining, they have to do those things. Conformity, I never do those things. So the great things I have, the chemistry with Boiling Frogs Post activist members there, our home of irate minority, these are the people who really know me, and they are like-minded with that. We have different philosophies and everything, but they are not into likability factor or the likability aspect. And I don't do it for that. I don't do it to be prettier or to be likable. Don't like me, please. And I start actually getting suspicious of people who are greatly liked. It's like, my God, how much they have to compromise to be liked by the majority. I mean, or the politicians when they go and give the speech and then they do a test speech and then right away they have a survey. Did it increase their likability, electability or not? I am not running for elections, right? And I am not running for actress job or things like that. So I don't have any motivation, reason to be or want to be likable. And I feel comfortable doing that with Boiling Frogs Post and my people. And I don't know if it makes sense to you what I'm trying to say. Meaning, when I'm talking, I don't have to worry about being politically correct. I don't like that, okay? And if people have problem with that, it's like, hasta la vista, baby. Get the hell out of here. I don't listen to me. There are a billion other venues. Go there. Or if I talk about certain things that people take, offenses for other reasons, again, I don't care. This is because we have done this. We have talked about family units, homeschooling, and how these are all interconnected with what we are seeing today, with the system we have today, with the government, with all the corruptions, with the war, and the fact that they are connected. James, they are not. When you talk about it, there are morons who come and say, why aren't you talking about politics? Why are you talking about personal stuff and how people are drugging their kids with ADHD medicine and sending them to school? Well, look what happens. And to give you an example, again, for some people, it's going to sound like an outside experience. It's not. I believe this is really interesting. So that's why I'm sharing here with people who may find it interesting. I didn't have this in Washington, D.C., where I lived there, but somebody knocked on our door and I opened, and there were two really, really older gentlemen. They were like in their early 80s, and it was a cold day. It's like it was high 12 degrees Fahrenheit that day. And they are dressed so sharp, like 1950s movies, and so clean cut. And one of them, his lips were blue, like shivering, and he's so old, like he's going to. So I usually I'm not interested, thank you very much. And I usually close it. I was intrigued in this cold, they are standing there. I said, yes. And they said they are with some Jehovah's Witnesses or something like that. Again, at this point, I usually close the door. I say, no, thank you very much. I'm not interested. No, I'm not meaning any insult to anyone. I'm not interested. They're holding this book. I said, well, what is this about? And he said, well, we would like to hand this and have a discussion with you. I said, because I'm still in my PJ. I said, I don't have the time to talk, but can I take a look at it? And he handed me this booklet, but the title of this particular Jehovah's Witness thing that they are giving out had to do with why our government is so corrupt and filthy or something. That got my interest. I said, that's very interesting because it's usually about save your soul or things like that. But you are putting the fact that why our government? And he said, well, of course, because that's a reflection of who we are too, with what we are seeing around. Okay. Again, some of our viewers say they don't reflect me. I'm not talking about them. So it's just like, please be quiet. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the majority who, they go vote, if they listen to Amy Goodman, so they definitely vote for Obama or Ray McGovern or blah, blah. I got that. And I started thinking about that. And I told my husband, I said, the philosophy of it. And I know we can spend so much time on philosophy and psychological aspects or anthropological aspects of these things, years talking about it. But if it is true, the majority is this, okay? With, drugging their kids, doing this, doing that, paying attention, all the things that we covered during our debate. Then what we have today in place should not be any surprise. I mean, it should be expected. I don't think it's like some sort of an aberration that we have such a horrifying, government that is supposed to be representative, but maybe it is a representative of this. And my husband says something like, well, usually elitist, people who are elite think that way. They say, I said, but put everything aside, isn't that true? Because they don't have any problem. For example, I know that if the government were try or attempt to say, we're not going to have the NFL shows this particular year for whatever reason, we have a chance for revolution. And I don't say this for a joke reason. Okay, you take that American football, NFL away, and you have revolution. There will be people up in arms out there doing, how could you take away that? On the other hand, when we sit down, you and I and Peter, and we yak and we talk about the fact that how the freedom of speech is being curtailed, we are assuming that majority of the people care about freedom of speech. I think systematically over the past 3, 4, 5 decades, the majority of people here have been rendered speechless. So if you don't have a goddamn speech, why should you worry about your free speech right to be taken away? Would you worry about it? I mean, really. And therefore, no matter how much we try, I know the biggest motto that we have is we want to inform. Why are you doing this, James? Why are you having your show?
I would say first and foremost, it's actually just a reflection of my own research. And I put it out there because if other people benefit from that, that's awesome. And I hope that they do. But ultimately, it's actually, I think, selfish. It's basically, I'm doing this for my own research purposes.
That's exactly right. So you have the right reason. But you ask a lot of people, one of the slogans for the podcast and even the real alternative, not the pseudo alternative, is why are you doing this? Because I want to inform people. And you have to assume that there are people who really want to be informed. And I have been doing this now since 2007, 2008. It's been 6, 7, 8 years. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that 99.9% of the people who join us and everything, they are as basically informed, or if not more informed than we are. And I have not come across people say, I didn't really know much about this and this, and I learned. Very few. If I were to do percentage, it would be very few. So exactly, to do it for the right reason. You said you're doing for selfish reason. You put it also motivates you to research and learn more. And it does that for me. And that's exactly what I want to do with Boiling Frogs Post. I want to do this with podcasts and then do some of those jointly with the people who are interested in this, rather than trying to put some general and then say, I'm doing to inform the public. That is not the motivation. And a lot of people say that is what we need to be doing. Go out there and inform people. I don't think I subscribe to that notion.
Yes, I think, that leads down a dangerous path, because then you start to pander to the interests of an audience rather than having it come from a spontaneous place of where you are in your research and interests. And I think that can lead down a road. I think it's obviously has to be a mixture of the two, because communication is important to what we're doing. I mean, there is a communicative aspect to this. So it's secondarily important, I would say, that this informs the masses, but primarily it is my own research interests. And I'm excited, I'm interested to see the form that your podcast ends up taking, because
don't have high expectations. The first few is going to be experiment, and I want to see what is coming from you.
But I think that's the point. I think the expectation should be that this is an experiment, that this is a work in progress that we can learn from, even if it doesn't succeed in the traditional sense of that word, because I myself also frequently think about my podcast and what it's doing and what I'm doing with it. And I think I've reimagined it several times over the years. And I think in my latest iteration, I'm much more confident in the fact that I'm not interested in following the daily, weekly news cycle. There are now enough alternative podcasters and other people out there doing that I don't think that's where I add the value to this conversation. I think I bring value in another way, and I'm going to try to look more at solutions this year. So I'm much more interested in the ways that we can change or jigger or rethink what we're doing here. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out. And who knows? I mean, maybe some of that will rub off on the corporate report and what I'm doing. But before we end today, this has already been a lengthy and far-reaching conversation, a very interesting one. But before we end today, before we started rolling today, you commended to my attention a poem by W.H. Auden called The Unknown Citizen, which I must admit I have never read. Or if I have read it, I don't recall it. So
this is one of my most favorite poems, and it affected me a lot. And I would like for you, maybe after you're done with me, if you want to add it to the end of while you're editing, if you want to add it there. It may not affect other people the same way, but it really affected me. And it was written, I believe, in 1940s, late 1930s, Unknown Citizen. And this was during the years where English truly was English as second language going through the school. And I took my first literature class, which for me was a really scary thing. Doing it on the first, second, third language is hard enough. Doing it with fourth language, it's like literature is a different era. You can go and ace all your econ classes when that's your third or fourth languages, but literature you're looking at. And I became extremely interested in American literature and English literature, and I took a lot of elective courses and courses that I didn't even transfer credits for. But I came across this poem, and it also went so much with my father's philosophy and what he taught me as a kid, and that was his belief for his life and his reaction. My father had disdain, right or wrong. Again, some people may get offended. My father had disdain for mediocrity, for the fear. It's like, I don't want to make waves. I don't want to challenge the status quo. I don't want my kids to challenge the status quo. He hated that. He was the opposite of that. And he wanted to raise me so I would be. And I hope he accomplished it, at least to a certain degree. But this poem goes to the heart of it. And when I just told you about, I feel comfortable at Boiling Frogs Post doing it with our people, the podcast, and have this stuff going, because they are not one of these. I know that because I have had so many communication with so many of our people there at Boiling Frogs Post that I know they are not this. And therefore, the fact that we really can expand a lot of things and move forward with things. So I would appreciate if you read it, because you have a much better voice than I do. And I know that you have masters in literature, I think was James Joyce. Yeah, James Joyce. And so it would be great to hear it from you reading it. And I know you would appreciate this poem as well.
Yes, well, I certainly do appreciate literature. So if other people have interesting requests or ideas out there in regards to great poetry or novels, I'm always open for that. So we'll leave it there. Sibel Edmonds, of course, boilingfrogspost.com, forthcoming podcast. If you want to be a part of that podcast conversation, Sibel is starting up. Of course, you can become a Boiling Frogs Post member, support the work, support the true alternative media. We do appreciate and rely on that type of support. And I think we'll leave it there for this conversation. Sibel Edmonds, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, James. And thank you, everyone.
The Unknown Citizen by W.H. Auden. 2JS/07 M378. This marble monument is erected by the state. He was found by the Bureau of Statistics to be one against whom there was no official complaint, and all the reports on his conduct agree that in the modern sense of an old-fashioned word, he was a saint. For in everything he did, he served the greater community. Except for the war, till the day he retired, he worked in a factory and never got fired, but satisfied his employers, Fudge Motors, Inc. Yet he wasn't a scab or odd in his views, for his union reports that he paid his dues. Our report on his union shows it was sound, and our social psychology workers found that he was popular with his mates and liked to drink. The press are convinced that he bought a paper every day, and that his reactions to advertisements were normal in every way. Policies taken out in his name prove that he was fully insured, and his health card shows he was once in hospital, but left it cured. Both Producers Research and High Grade Living declare he was fully sensible to the advantages of the installment plan, and had everything necessary to the modern man: a phonograph, a radio, a car, and a Frigidaire. Our researchers into public opinion are content that he held the proper opinions for the time of year. When there was peace, he was for peace. When there was war, he he went. He was married and added 5 children to the population, which our eugenist says was the right number for a parent of his generation, and our teachers report that he never interfered with their education. Was he free? Was he happy? The question is absurd. Had anything been wrong, we should certainly have heard. This video is brought to you by the subscribers of BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information on this and other topics, please go to BoilingFrogsPost.com. For more information and commentary from James Corbett, please go to CorbettReport.com.